Okay. All righty, so we are recording. Loring, I'm going to turn this over to you. So Loring, if you want to go ahead, and it looks like you're unmuted, you can go ahead and share your screen. And again, guys, if you have any questions, put those in the chat box for us. Take it away, Loring.
All right, well, hi everybody, welcome. It seems like we've kind of had a black cloud hanging over us here lately. And so I think it's a good time to start thinking about some of our favorite things. And for me, springs are some of my favorite things. So we're going to talk for a little while tonight about springs. As you probably know, there are hundreds or thousands of beautiful springs in Missouri. And we're going to show you some pictures of springs, but I really wanted to focus tonight on the human relationship with springs. They were very important for our ancestors, especially. They were gathering places, social centers, really centers of daily life for those people. And I want to tell the story about Missouri Springs, kind of from the standpoint of an old traveler from Tennessee. John Pope Campbell grew up in the middle part of Tennessee and near Nashville in Maury County. And he kind of got the wanderlust. And in 1830, he took his wife, Louisa, and a child not yet 1 year old, and they headed for Missouri. As I said, he lived near Nashville in Maury County in central Tennessee. That is about 500 miles today by road to Springfield. So it was a long trip in 1830, a lot longer than it is today. He started out on pretty good roads into Nashville. Then the wagon group headed up to Hopkinsville, Kentucky, on roads that steadily got worse as they went. They got to the Ohio River at Golconda, Illinois, where they crossed on a ferry. They went across the southern through frozen prairies, and they got to the Mississippi River just north of Cape Girardeau, where they crossed on another ferry. And you can imagine, February 1830, the Missouri River or Mississippi River was full of ice, floating ice. It was gale force winds. The ferry they were on was so rickety and tipsy that they feared for their lives. And they knew it was going to be certain death if they fell in, but they made it across. So they took really sketchy roads from there through the little town of Jackson, headed up the Whitewater River to the town of Farmington, which was near the lead mines that had been operating there for about 40 years at that point. Then they struck out west towards Caledonia, a little town with 12 people, a little store there and supplied. And then they really got onto bad roads from there to the west over towards Steelville, Missouri, where they probably stopped for water at the large spring there in Steelville. Springs really had a big effect on our Springfield road system. In those days, they needed watering stops for the people and the livestock. So a lot of the roads in Missouri, the old roads, actually connected springs, like this Independence Spring, which was at the head of the California and Oregon trails, and the big spring at Arrow Rock on the right, which was the first watering stop on the ferry across the Missouri River on the Santa Fe Trail. From Steelville, they headed 12 miles on really bad roads and got to Massey's Iron Works, which were at the beautiful Merrimack Spring. This was started by Thomas James in 1829, so just a year before the Campbells came through. He had bought 10,000 acres around Merrimack Spring mainly for firewood to make, or wood to make charcoal to fire the iron furnace. But the spring was used to turn 3 big wheels that operated the giant pistons or air pumps that were used to superheat the furnace. And they also were used to turn cams that dropped the hammers, these 500-pound hammers like you see on the right there, which were used to beat the impurities out of the iron that came out of the furnace. The ironworks are long gone. The furnace is still there. It's an interesting place to visit. And one of the remnants of the early days is this old powerhouse. The water of Mammoth Spring was also used to generate electricity for a while, and this is the powerhouse on the left. But today, the main use for Mammoth Spring is for growing trout, and there's a Missouri Department of Conservation fish hatchery located there. In fact, there were fish hatcheries and fish growing facilities at about 30 springs in Missouri over the years. They were especially good for growing trout because trout grow well in the about 57, 58 degree water in springs. So lots of springs in Missouri were used for growing fish, including this old postcard behind these guys. They're at Westover on the upper Merrimack, and Crystal Springs behind it is down near Cassville. Another spring that was used for growing fish was Sequoia Spring in Springfield in the James River Basin. And in 1920, the Missouri Fish Commission bought a few acres around Sequoia Spring to establish the hatchery. It also became Missouri's smallest state park. About the only place in the James River Basin where springs are now used for growing fish is at Montague Spring at the Mountain Valley pay-to-fish trout facility, which is on Torrey Creek in Christian County. So from Steelville, the Campbell party headed due west. They stopped at Harrison's store for supplies at the confluence of the Gasconade and Little Piney River. Then they headed down southwest on the Gasconade Valley. They crossed the Big Piney River at Devil's Elbow, and they went into Waynesville and stopped at Ruby Spring, which was another famous watering place along the road there. Basically, it's right along I-44 almost now. Another famous spring, if the Campbells would have been there 3 years or 7 years later in the winter of 1837, they would have seen a large band of Cherokee Indians camped at this spring on the infamous Trail of Tears. Today, Ruby Spring is used a lot by divers. It's a very famous dive location. People come from all over the country to dive there. Mark Van Patten, a friend of mine, told me a story about back in the 80s when he visited Ruby Spring of a diver coming up in a panic. He had lost his dive partners. They didn't come up, and they called in divers from Fort Leonard Wood and other places, and they didn't find them for 24 hours. Of course, they were dead in about 160 feet of water in the spring. So cave diving can be dangerous, but these folks did not have cave certificates, and they ignored the warning signs at the spring. Blue Spring on the left is a real popular diving spot as well. One of our deepest springs. It's about 270 feet deep right at the orifice, which accounts for the really amazing blue color of this spring. And divers have been down in it as deep as 315 feet. But that's not the deepest spring. Divers have been down in Cannonball Spring, which is now under the waters of Wapapello Reservoir on the St. Francis River. And divers have been down to 385 feet in that spring, which is the deepest, as far as I know, deepest of divers have been in the springs. A real famous place to explore and dive is Devil's Well on the Current River, where you go down these stairs down to the bottom of the sinkhole, and then you can look down into this bottomless pit to a lake far below, about 100 feet below. Divers and others have been down in this. Jerry Vineyard went down in 1956 in a bosun's chair to explore this underground lake, 400 feet long, 200 feet wide, and over 200 feet deep. It's the largest underground, one of the largest underground lakes in the United States. So from Waynesville and Ruby Spring, the Campbells headed west to the confluence of the Gasconade with the Osage Fork. They headed southwest up the Osage Fork of the Gasconade to Pleasant Prairie, which is now called Marshfield, and then on into near Springfield, what is today Springfield, to Jerry Pearson's mill on the Pearson Creek. And this is Pearson or Danforth Spring, one of the springs along the Pearson Creek where the mill was located. We don't have any pictures or drawings of this mill, of course, since it was built in 1830, really the same year that Campbell's came through. And but this mill on the left is a reconstructed mill at Reed Spring in Centerville, Missouri, and that's probably similar to what Jerry Pearson's mill looked like. Well, mills were very commonly put at springs in the Ozarks, and there was another mill at Jones Spring in the James River Basin, just east of Springfield. This was built just a few years after Campbell arrived, and it was a corn cracker mill. The water in the flume actually powered, or the wheel powered a pounding device that pounded the grain. And later this mill became a distillery. And about 10 years after Campbell got to our area, this mill was built also in the James River Valley. This is the Cumberland Mill, which was on Silver Lake Branch, with beautiful little spring-fed stream that feeds right into the James River, just a little bit above Hootentown. And the old mill dam, portions of the old mill dam are still there at that site. And of course, one of the most famous mills in the state, most photographed mills in the state, is Alley Mill at Alley Spring. It and a lot of mills became the nuclei of communities in Missouri. Some of the first things to be built around these mills were blacksmith shops, and then general stores, and then other stores and homes. And so as a result, over 70 places, towns, cities in Springfield now have the word spring in their name. From Jerry Pearson's mill on Pearson Creek, the Campbells headed down Pearson Creek and then went over to the natural well site, which later became the site of Springfield. The marker about the natural well is on the building across the street from Founders Park. It does give the wrong location because the marker has been moved. That natural well was also considered for the Springfield water supply at one point. In fact, it was a spring that was used. There was a guy that hauled water up to sprinkle the streets in Springfield out of that spring. But the city fathers chose Fulbright Spring, north of Springfield, shown in this old black and white photograph, as the first water for the public water supply for the city of Springfield in 1883. Today, Springfield is the only major city in Missouri that uses a spring for part of its public drinking water supply, but other cities have considered using springs. On the left is Bennett Spring, which was once considered by Kansas City as a source for drinking water, and Merrimack Spring on the right, which was considered by the city of St. Louis for drinking water. Like Campbell, most of the original pioneers in Missouri, or at least in the Ozarks, really sought out the springs for water supplies. They looked for perennial springs that were up on river benches, up out of the bottomlands, to keep them away from the fevers, and that became their water supply. The spring was typically protected by a spring house. In the early days, a lot of them were made of wood, like the one on the left, and then later they were built out of about anything, but most commonly rock, brick, or block. This old spring house, it's got 1920 on the door. is kind of a distinct looking spring house. You don't see too many like this. It's over near Williamsville, Missouri. The spring house, one of the main ideas of the spring house was to protect the family's water supply from livestock, keep animals out of the spring. And also it served as the family refrigerator. It would stay normally about spring temperature, so 57, 58 degrees in there, so they could keep milk and meat cool in the spring house. Much more recently, some of our state's largest springs have been considered for bottling purposes. In the 1980s, Greer Spring was considered by the Anheuser-Busch Corporation out of St. Louis. They were thinking about building a bottling plant to produce pure Ozark spring water for bottling and drinking purposes. That plan never came to fruition, obviously, which I'm grateful for, because that Greer Spring is one of my favorite places in Missouri. And other springs were also considered, like Hodgson Mill Spring. Jim Van Dyke, a friend of mine who retired from the Department of Natural Resources, told me that he was approached by a bottling company actually, who was considering using the water of Hodgson Mill Spring to bottle, until Jim told the man that there were two sewage treatment plants within the recharge area of Hodgson Mill Spring. And so the man changed his mind. Greer Spring was also considered for hydropower. There was a plan to maybe build a dam there in 1905. Edward Shepard, who was a retired professor at Drury College in Springfield, investigated Greer Spring site for St. Louis investors, potential investors for a hydropower project. That also did never happen, luckily. And instead, it may have been preempted by the dam at Power Site on the White River in 1911, which is in the black and white photograph. Another big spring, Mammoth Spring, just over the state line in Arkansas, was developed as a hydropower facility, and the electricity served several of the little towns around the spring. So if Campbell would have veered a little further north in his journey, he might have come across Sulphur Spring Resort in 1830, just south of St. Louis. It was just getting going at that time. Sulphur Spring came pouring into the river, according to explorers, in a stream about as big around as your arm. And Bill Sublette, who was a famous mountain man and trapper in the 1820s. The mountain trade was all funneling through St. Louis at that time. Sublette also pioneered the wagon route to Santa Fe for the trade in the Santa Fe Trail. And these ventures made him wealthy. So in 1830, he bought about 800 acres on the River des Peres near St. Louis that contained this Sulphur Spring, and he made that into a water resort, a spa. And so let's send samples of his water to St. Louis for a chemist to examine, and the results really encouraged him, because the chemist told him that it was very similar to the White Sulphur Spring in Virginia, which was very famous by then. In the 1830s, spa touring was a popular activity all along the eastern seaboard of the United States. But springs really have a very long history as healing waters. This is a painting of the Pool of Siloam mentioned in the Bible, also called Gihon Spring, where Jesus gave a blind man sight, and the water was said to heal when, quote, troubled by angels. This was also the drinking water supply for the city of Jerusalem. But this craze, the mineral water craze, even reached into the James River Basin. And we had a town called Ponce de Leon, which was founded around the healing spring. This guy, Fountain T. Welch, not him in the wagon, but on the gravestone down here, founded this resort town in about 1880. He was hunting along Gulf Creek. He had an infected cut on his hand. He bathed a wound in a spring along the creek at that location, and found that it was miraculously healed. Word got out, obviously with the help of Fountain T. Welch, I'm sure. And pretty soon people were flocking from all around to come drink the water and bathe in it and build camp near the spring and even build houses, so that in about 1900, Ponce de Leon was said to be the biggest town in Stone County. This grave marker down here on the right is Fountain T. Welch's grave. What a great name for a guy that found a spring town, Fountain T. Welch. He is buried in the cemetery just a few miles east of Ponce de Leon. Back to Sulphur Springs, it, like a lot of other springs, including healing springs, were casualties of development, urban development. In the case of Sulphur Spring, the River des Peres became very polluted, and the spring was basically obliterated by the development that was coming out of the St. Louis area. And sadly, that's a tale that's been told even in the James River Basin to some extent. This is the old Fulbright Spring, or at least maybe the old Fulbright Spring in downtown Springfield, that was uncovered recently during grading work for Jordan Valley Park. This was a famous spring in its day. It was used for baptisms. It was part of the city of Springfield's public water supply, a backup water supply for the well on the square, but was basically filled in probably by railroad development in the 1870s. And like I said, just recently uncovered, but it would be a great and historic find, but the spring is contaminated. It's got hydrocarbons, pollutants in it. And that sadly has also happened at a lot of the largest springs in our state, such as Merrimack Spring. Back in 1978, there was a pipeline spill along Dry Creek over here, south of Merrimack Spring. The pipeline was carrying fertilizer, ammonia and urea fertilizer. There was a break. The pollutants went about 12 miles underground and came out at Merrimack Spring, killed a lot of fish in the hatchery, killed these cave crayfish. Their white bodies got flushed into the daylight, and there were hundreds of crayfish, and a lot of fish in the spring branch were also killed in that incident. Another major pollution incident is Mammoth Springs. As we said, just south of Missouri border. This is the third largest spring in the Ozarks after Big and Greer. And most of the recharge area for Mammoth Spring is actually in Missouri, stretches north up to the West Plains area. And in 1981, the bottom fell out of the West Plains sewage lagoon, a huge lagoon. I don't remember how many acres, but large. And overnight, about 30 to 40 million gallons of sewage drained into the shallow groundwater system and into the conduits leading to Mammoth Spring. And as you can imagine, that was a pretty big uproar. And it took about 2 or 3 months for the pollutants to kind of finally clear through the groundwater system. Some wells were contaminated. It was a pretty bad deal. On a smaller scale, we've had somewhat similar things happen in Greene County. This is Raider Spring, the largest spring in the county. And the sewage from the city of Springfield Southwest Sewage Treatment Plant goes into Wilson's Creek, which is a losing stream. And most of the flow goes underground and comes out into Raider Spring. Back in the 60s and the 70s, when the Southwest plant was overloaded and not functioning very well, we had very polluted water going into Wilson's Creek and obviously right into Raider Spring. The spring was gray. turbid, stinky, and it was a pretty big mess. Luckily, after the 70s, the city upgraded the sewage treatment plant several times to the point that now the water coming out of Raider Spring is actually pretty clean. So basically, why worry? Why care? Why should we care? You know, we don't use springs for drinking water. Of course, city does, but you know, part of its water supply, about 20%. But for the most part, people in the country no longer use springs, they use wells. We no longer use spring houses for refrigerators. And so why should we worry what happens to the springs? Why should we work? Why should we care? Well, actually, there's a lot of good reasons to care. For one thing, springs are very important ecologically to Missouri and the Ozarks. If it weren't for springs, many of our rivers would be bone dry during the summer. The springs basically feed into the base flow of many of our largest and most scenic streams. So we wouldn't have floating and we wouldn't have good fishing. The cool water of springs is especially good for smallmouth bass. Smallmouth bass thrive in spring-fed, clear spring-fed streams. They grow faster in Ozark streams than they do in north waters. And obviously trout do a lot better in cool water. So if it weren't for springs, we wouldn't have those opportunities. Springs are also home to some very unique, highly adapted creatures that are very interesting, like the Ozark Hellbender. This is the little larvae Hellbender here. They're in trouble, and we may have as few as 600 left in Missouri. They're being restocked, they're being raised, and they're trying to grow them, but been in steep decline since the 1970s. And the Ozark cavefish, which is known from only about 40 sites in southwest Missouri and northwest Arkansas, known nowhere else in the world except those places. Their numbers are maybe steady, we're not sure. They're pretty hard to monitor, but they're a threatened species. And the Tumbling Creek cave snail, which as far as we know is known from only one spring cave in the world, in southern Missouri. And the Niangua darter, which obviously needs very cool spring-fed streams to survive. Springs are also very important commercially to our state. When you think about all the revenue generated by our large state parks, many of them at springs, and especially our trout parks, like Montague here, which is kind of an interesting spring that was clogged up in the 1890s and suddenly broke out into a bunch of openings after a big flood. And Bennett Spring and Roaring River Spring and Merrimack Springs, all very important. If it weren't for the springs, we would not have the hatcheries and the fishing that we do. They're all based on those springs and their cool waters. But springs are also still important for drinking water. We're not going directly to the spring with a bucket anymore to get water, but in many cases, our shallow groundwater in our springs is directly connected to the deeper groundwater resources that we do depend on for our drinking water supplies. So springs can be thought of as early warning indicators or barometers of groundwater quality. If there's something wrong with the spring water, if it's polluted, there is cause for concern, especially about our drinking water supplies, our deeper groundwater supplies. And another reason we should care is because springs are just cool and beautiful. And here's two that fit that category, I think, in the James River Basin. These are at Jude Ranch along Pedalo Creek in Webster County. You got Otto Lasley Spring here on the left and Tall Man Spring on the right. Now, Tall Man Spring is not named for the guy standing by it because they're not very tall. And some springs are just flat out breathtaking. The blue at Blue Spring just is mind-boggling. That color is just so incredible. Of course, when you talk about Blue Spring in Missouri, you got to be careful because there's actually 18 different Blue Springs in Missouri. Very common name. Some exquisite colors and textures and views of springs and spring water, like Alley Spring here on the Jacks Fork, and Blue Spring, another Blue Spring, which is on the 11 Point River below the Narrows, which is a really cool place along the 11 Point River. Or Hahatonka Spring, at one of the most interesting karst areas in Missouri at Hahatonka State Park. And Turner Mill Spring along the 11 Point River, or the magnificent canyon of Greer Spring, which is just an amazing place. Springs are also important historically, like the old mill at Alley Spring, built in the 1890s, said to turn out fine white flour. And it was partially restored by the CCC in the 1930s. Falling Mill Spring, which is in a very remote spring in Oregon County. Mills in the Ozarks or elsewhere had some of the earliest and most advanced technologies of any place in the Ozarks. Like this big wheel at Turner Mill Spring, which is over 30 feet in diameter. And we can marvel and be amazed at the power of some of the springs, especially these Vauclusian springs, which have the big boils, meaning the water is coming up from great depth, like Big Spring here, biggest spring in Missouri, 300 million gallons a day. To put that in context for you, that's over twice the amount of water used daily in St. Louis. And the big boil in the bottom of the canyon of Greer Spring, which produces a river in itself that flows into the nearby 11 Point. And when you happen to visit a spring right after heavy rain or soon after a heavy rain, some of these boils are just something that is very mesmerizing. I'm going to try to play this video. It doesn't always work. We'll see if it does. I'll let you guess where that is. You probably know already. Just as importantly, springs are, I think, good for our souls. They're good places to still our minds, to think, to breathe the cool air, and enjoy the natural beauty. And this is probably my favorite spring in the James River Basin. This is Hayes Spring at the Hayes Spring Conservation Area on Dry Crane Creek. I can't think of a better place to sit and enjoy a warm spring day. Thank you for listening, and I'm available. I don't know how long Brent will let this go on, but as far as I'm concerned, we can take any questions that are out there.
All right, thanks, Loring. I appreciate it. Guys, if you have any questions, feel free to throw those in the chat box, and Todd and I will try to get to them. Loring, I had a couple of them that are kind of related to the questions that we get frequently. One is a personal question. I'll throw that out there first for you. So with all your research that you did for this book, what's some of the most shocking or unique things that you found that maybe you weren't aware of? Whether that's a spring here in the Ozarks or James River watershed or throughout Missouri. What's something that like sticks out that you were like, oh wow, I can't believe I didn't know that.
There's a lot of things, and the springs over in the eastern Ozarks are just so amazing. I mean, we have a lot of cool springs around here, but one of the places that was just amazing to me is Grand Gulf and the Gulf. And Tim Smith, who is now working for James River Partnership, can tell you a story about exploration at Grand Gulf. And that is a giant sinkhole that feeds into Mammoth Spring. And in the 1890s, Ruth Hoppen, yeah, the cave explorer, was in there and in the cave in there and saw cave fish. And then a big flood apparently clogged up the opening. And Tim Smith went over there and attempted to find that opening so that they could get access to that underground river that she canoed along. And not too far from there is a place called the Gulf, which is on Forest Service land, which is a big sinkhole with a big blue spring at the bottom of it. And that is one of the few places in Missouri that cave fish have been seen in the daylight. And there was a lot of research done on cave fish, and cave fish are drawn to these openings like that because that's where food falls in. So, you know, Don Rimbach, who was a diver back in the 80s and 90s, said that it looked like a goldfish bowl at feeding time when he was scuba diving in that spring with all the cave fish at the top of that. So that's one of the cave fish are pretty cool and amazing to me, and you know, raises a lot of questions about, you know, how many there really are down there and things like that. So that's a real interesting thing to me. The pollution incidents are interesting, you know, kind of horrifying having so much sewage going, you know, slurping down into the ground. But on the positive side, you know, it does help us learn a lot about the recharge area of springs and you know, how vulnerable they are to contamination and things like that. So some of those stories were really kind of unsettling for me when I talked to people about them.
We got a question in the chat from Ray Jones. Ray asked, towards the end, you showed a boiling spring and said we should probably recognize it. You want to go ahead and identify that one?
Well, did he guess?
Nope, he didn't. He didn't know who or where it was.
Anybody know? That was Merrimack.
All
yeah,
right.
Jim Dyke took that video. I don't remember what the flow was, but it was big. Big Spring gets a pretty big boil at higher water, but at real high water, the current river basically overflows boiling or Big Spring. And so, you know, it's hard to see that kind of thing there. And same with Greer Spring, of course, you know, its boil comes up in the bottom of a river there. And when there's a lot of water, you don't, you know, the boil doesn't get more impressive at real high water.
So one question that we get on occasion, we have people that call the office and they want to know about a spring or a groundwater feature near their home. And I know a lot of these springs aren't named. So where can somebody find out information on some of these features if they're curious or have something near their home?
Well, there is if you're in Greene County, there is a book about the springs of Greene County. I co-wrote that with Jim Van Dyke and Ken Thompson back in the, I don't know, a long time ago. And we have some lists of the springs in the county there. The book that got me interested in springs is called Springs of Missouri. Jerry Vineyard wrote that. It was published in 1974. And it's got information about springs all over the state. Now, you know, if it's a spring on your farm, it's not likely to be in that book. And there's probably not any really good source for information. But if you're anywhere near Springfield, you can talk to me and I will try to find out what I can, because I'm very interested on the histories of our local springs. So, you know, and there are people who know a lot about the springs in our area too, that you know may know. When I was doing research, usually the first place I start is with the city clerk in the town nearest the spring, and just say, who in this town knows about your springs? And it's amazing how many times there is somebody, a historian or somebody there, or somebody that works at the library. And, they a lot of times have a lot of information and can point you to, how to find out more about them.
Another good resource here, at least in Greene County, the folks that work at Greene County, they have a ton of knowledge on this type of stuff. So if you live in Greene County and you have a spring on your farm, like Loring mentioned, you might give them a call. They know quite a bit about the history. We've got some excellent geologists on staff too. So definitely a good resource there.
And if it's a spring anywhere near Bull Creek, you got Bob. I see Bob and Barb sitting there. They're on Bull Creek right now.
All right, we had a question come in. Sharon Schultz asked, could you address what sinkholes are? Just to make sure everybody's familiar with sinkholes and other karst features.
Yeah, sinkholes are features of karst terrain. Basically, the geology is very porous here. There's a lot of openings underground. And when that opening goes up to the surface, it's a sinkhole. Sometimes it's a cave collapse. A lot of our biggest sinkholes are actually collapsed caves that just go down into a funnel-shaped opening in the ground. But most of ours in the area are actually solutional sinkholes, and they're basically dissolved from below. These conduits open up as the water goes underground. These conduits open up, and the soil, the overlying soil, settles down into those open end of those conduits, and you get this shallow bowl-shaped. It looks just like a bowl, a lot of them, sinkholes.
Okay. If anybody has any more questions, feel free to put them in the chat. Another common question we get is, okay, I have this feature on my property. What can I do to protect it? Obviously, a lot of these springs are not as big as Merrimack Spring or Big Spring or anything like that. But if somebody has a small seep or spring on their property, what can they do? What are some best management practices that they can take to protect water quality?
Well, that's why it's really important to know that. And the other kind of a main thing I didn't really go over is the recharge area. The recharge area is the area of ground surface that contributes flow to the spring. And obviously for Big Spring, there's been traces of up to 40 miles to Big Spring. So that's a huge recharge area. Your little spring on the backside of your farm, if it's flowing a few gallons a minute, may have a recharge area of a couple of acres. So what's the most important thing is to pay attention to what's going on in the recharge area of the spring. Obviously, you don't want to put a lot of pesticides or something on the ground in that recharge area, because that could affect the spring and the life in the spring. But a lot of times the recharge area goes over onto adjacent properties. And so, it's also important what other people may be doing on the recharge area. And you can't always control that, but you can pay attention to it. And, if there's something over there that could cause a problem with the groundwater, then, you can speak up and find out. Is that something that's allowed, or, should they be doing this? It's pretty hard to protect a whole recharge area of the Big Springs. Like I was saying about Hodgson Mill Springs, there's 2 wastewater treatment plant discharges within that recharge area. Now, our wastewater treatment plants, for the most part, do a pretty good job these days. So, it's not that the water is terribly polluted, but it's still treated sewage, and it's still part of the recharge area of the spring. And that's really why we've had so many problems, because of those big recharge areas. There's pipelines, there's roads, you can have spills. It's a big job, but it's an important job.
So you mentioned in the presentation some notable pollution incidences within springs here in Missouri and Arkansas. What are some of the common pollutants that we find in springs?
Well, a lot of them will have E. coli and fecal bacteria in them. That's pretty common. That's why most people are advised not to drink spring water unless it's been treated these days, because it's just real easy to get bacteria, small microbes into a spring recharge area. In the urban areas like around Springfield, we've had quite a few problems with gasoline leaking underground storage tanks have polluted some of our springs, including one out at Elfindale not all that long ago. So that's a pretty common one. Some of the bigger ones, like I mentioned at Merrimack, was actually a pipeline spill. And pipelines are underground, and people tend not to really think about those as pollution sources. In fact, when that spill first happened, they didn't think it was going to be any problem. They went to pump it up, pump the pollutants out of this creek where they saw it. And a big rain came, unfortunately, and washed it down. It's a losing stream, dry creek. I mean, and the water went underground and went almost 13 miles over to Merrimack Spring. So there's another spring, Jones Spring, we talked about briefly. It's been contaminated several times in the past. Highway 65 goes right over the recharge area. The industrial area of East Springfield is in the recharge area with a lot of sinkholes. And we've had chemical contaminants go into that. I remember going out to Jones Spring one time. It smelled just like shoe polish, the spring, and the fish died in the lakes in Jones Spring Branch below there. So I'd say we've had a wide variety of things that have happened and can happen. It's really a matter of being vigilant, though, and understanding that in karst country, the stuff that spills on the ground or that you put in the ground or a tank underground in a recharge area of a spring is a potential source of pollution and needs to be monitored.
We had another question come in from Michael Baird. He asked, how accurate is dye tracing to follow water and stream flow? So why don't you go ahead and kind of first mention what is dye tracing, and then kind of get into the accuracy of that and how it's been used around maybe Springfield and the James River watershed.
Well, there's if you get the book, there's some interesting stories about old tracing. There's one guy that threw chicken feathers in a sinkhole and then went down to the spring and watched them come out at the spring. So that's an early trace. Anything that goes through the conduit can be used as a tracer. People have used club moss spores, Lycopodium spores, because Lycopodium moss are not common around here. So if you find the spore in the spring, it's your spore that you dumped in a sinkhole or somewhere. But most tracing now is done with dyes. Since we're putting them in water, they have to be harmless dyes. And you would maybe, dyes have been flushed down toilets. They've been put into sinkholes. They've been put into leaking ponds. Any place that there's enough water flow going through, the dye goes through underground and comes out at the spring. And you put usually a carbon packet in the spring. That's a receptor packet, and the dye gets absorbed onto the carbon packet. So you take the carbon packet back to the laboratory and analyze it. And if the dye is in the charcoal in the packet, then you got a positive trace. And you usually do that over a period of weeks, because in some cases these dye tracers may take weeks or months, even in some cases, to get them through the groundwater system. It's moving rapidly, but not lightning speed through the groundwater system. So they're very accurate. Dye traces are very accurate because the dyes that we use nowadays are not found in nature normally. Fluorescein dye, which is commonly used, is found in antifreeze. So if there was a spill of antifreeze or somebody dumped antifreeze, that could look like a positive trace. So that is why we do background on springs before we do the dye trace. We put the packets in a spring for a while and we examine them before we dump the dye to see if there's anything in there. There could also be interference between dye tracing experiments. If you got a bunch of people doing dye tracing in the same area, that could get pretty confusing. So Greene County actually started a dye trace registration, I think it was 1990, If Tim is on here, he might remember. And that was the purpose of that. Was we had so much dye tracing going on in Greene County, we were afraid that, you know, there might be interference between dye traces. But it's very important work, and it's good work, because we need to know these recharge areas, where they are, so that we know if there's a spill or some kind of a pollution incident or problem, where is that going to go and how long is it going to take to get there? So we really need to know, you know, these recharge areas and how the spring is going to be affected.
All right. I think that's all the questions I've seen come through so far. If anybody has anything else, we've got just a few more minutes.
I can just add one thing. If you get the book and you want me to sign it, I am very happy to sign it. And I will try to say something nice about you too in there. So
Tim Smith did comment, and he said that Greene County Dye Trace Registry was started around 1990.
okay.
So yeah, there you go. There's the answer to that. I guess one of the last things that probably want to leave with is, you know, what are some things that people can do at home to protect our groundwater? Obviously, a lot of the things that can be done to protect groundwater are going to protect surface water as well. And springs are that conduit, you know, that outlet between ground and surface water. So what can we do to protect groundwater here at home?
Well, I think you hit the nail on the head there, Brent, because, you know, anything you can do to protect water, period, is important, whether it's surface water or groundwater. You know, and the idea that the ground is somehow a filter, you know, we have to sort of, you know, get past that old mentality that, you know, we can pour leftover stuff down on the soil because it ain't going to hurt anything. Well, you know, that's not true. And especially in karst, where the stuff you pour on the ground may go right into the groundwater, you know. So I think, going back to what I said earlier, one of the best things we can do is just be vigilant and really make sure that our laws and our rules and everything that are here and established to protect groundwater are adhered to and enforced. And if there's someone who, for whatever reason, does not choose to do the right thing and is causing some pollution, potential pollution of groundwater, it's our duty as citizens to really get involved and try to stop that and to make sure it doesn't happen again. So, you know, we just have to be active and engaged. I think that's the main thing for water, whether it's springs or the James River or whatever it is, you know, we can't sit by and watch things happen and then just complain. We've got to be involved.
Great. Well, Loring, thank you so much for doing this. Your book is beautiful. I've got my copy sitting right here. The photos are excellent. The content is awesome, very well written, and it would make a great Christmas gift for somebody or just for yourselves. I know there's a few copies left at the Watershed Center from what we've been told. It's also available at the Ozark Society or ozarksociety.net. I put the link in the chat feature, so if you're interested in finding it there, you can access it through the chat. Todd also included it in the email that you received with your Zoom information. So if you haven't yet, pick up your copy. It's a wonderful resource, very well written. You learn a lot. I've really enjoyed flipping through it. I've only made it part of the way through it so far, so I think you guys will really enjoy it. Mary asked, Loring, what's your email address? What's the best way they could get a hold of you?
Just send it to, you can email me at my home email. It's lbullard1415@gmail.com.
All right, and feel free to call us or email us at the JRBP office as well if you're interested, and we can get you connected with Loring.
You could also email me at loringbullard@missourustate.edu as well.
Great.
So,
well, guys, thank you all so much for joining us tonight. We don't want to keep you too long. I know we're coming up at the end of the hour. We really appreciate you all, you know, going through this process with us. Some of these virtual meetings are new to us, and I think that it's gone really well, and I think that we'll have opportunities to do this here into the future. Look forward to some educational series coming up on various topics. We're still kind of working out the lineup. So just know this isn't going to be a one-time thing. We're hoping to do more of these things in the future. And again, we thank you so much for your membership. That unrestricted funding is really big for our budget and allows us to work in other areas of the watershed that we may not have a contract or a grant at this time. So really helps a lot, and we really appreciate it. Hope everybody has a good, safe Thanksgiving. Hope everybody stays diligent about their COVID protocols. It's no fun, but it's something we all need to do for one another. And again, just thank you so much. And if you have any questions about your membership, feel free to give us a call or reach out to us at the office. We are going to be switching to a new membership management software. So we will have to get in contact with some of you guys regarding credit card information if you have that on file. Since we're switching to a new system, we're going to have to update that. So sorry for the inconvenience. It's really going to help staff on our end, and it'll hopefully make the process smoother for you guys as well. Again, thank you guys so much. And if you have any questions, feel free to email us. You can reach me at brentonstock, BRENTONSTOCK at missouristate.edu. Or you can reach Todd at Todd Wilkinson, TODD WILKINSON at missouristate.edu. I'd love to hear from you guys. Thank you.